Sofia Rivera had exactly 37 minutes to make her connecting flight from Denver to Boston. 37 minutes to sprint across one of America's largest airports while dragging a carry-on with a broken wheel that insisted on veering left. 37 minutes that were rapidly dwindling as she stood in an interminable security line, watching TSA agents move with what seemed like deliberate slowness. Come on, she muttered under her breath, checking her watch for the 5th time in 2 minutes. The medical conference had run late, and her first flight had been delayed by turbulence. If she missed this connection, she wouldn't make it back for her early morning shift tomorrow. Dr. Westbrook would have her head. When she finally cleared security, Sofia broke into a controlled run, her practical sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as she dodged slower travelers. Gate 47. She was at Gate 22. The airport's moving walkways became her salvation as she power-walked alongside tourists who stood stationary, oblivious to her urgency. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably the hospital again. The ER at Boston Memorial had been short-staffed for months, and as one of the newer attending physicians, Sofia had borne the brunt of extra shifts. She ignored the call. Whatever crisis was unfolding would have to wait until she was safely on her plane. That's when she heard it, a commotion up ahead, near Gate 23. "Is there a doctor here? Someone call for help." A flight attendant's voice rose above the typical airport din. Sofia hesitated for precisely 2 seconds, glancing at her watch. 29 minutes until her flight departed. She could still make it if she kept going, but her instincts kicked in before her self-preservation could mount a reasonable argument. She veered right toward the small crowd gathering at the neighboring gate. "I'm a doctor," she called, pushing through the circle of onlookers. "Please give me some space." On the floor lay a man in his late 30s or early 40s, unconscious. Business attire, expensive suit now rumpled. No visible trauma. A leather briefcase had spilled open beside him, papers and a laptop scattered across the terminal floor. Sofia dropped to her knees, setting her medical bag down and immediately checking his pulse. Weak but present. His skin was clammy, his breathing shallow. Sir, can you hear me?" Sofia tapped his cheek gently. No response. She looked up at the nearest airport employee. "How long has he been down?" "Just collapsed maybe a minute ago," said the gate agent, her face pale. "He was waiting to board and just went down." Sofia tilted his head back slightly, checking his airway. "Has anyone called for medical assistance?" "Airport responders are on their way," someone in the crowd answered. The man suddenly stopped breathing. Sofia checked his pulse again. Nothing. "He's in cardiac arrest. I need to start CPR." She positioned her hands on his chest and began compressions, counting under her breath. "Someone find me an AED if there's one nearby." A security guard pushed through the crowd. "Got one right here, doctor." After 30 compressions, Sofia gave 2 rescue breaths, then resumed compressions while the security guard prepared the AED. Her world narrowed to this moment, this rhythm. Her missed flight no longer mattered. The only thing that existed was keeping this stranger's heart pumping until it remembered how to do its job on its own. The AED pads were placed on the man's chest. "Clear!" Sofia commanded, and everyone stepped back as the machine delivered a shock. The man gasped suddenly, his eyes flying open in confusion. They were startlingly blue, the kind of blue that reminded Sofia of the Caribbean waters she'd visited on her one actual vacation 3 years ago. "What?" He tried to speak, disoriented. "Sir, you're at Denver International Airport. You had a cardiac event?" "Try not to move," Sofia said, her professional voice calm and steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Help is on the way." He blinked slowly, focusing on her face. For a moment, something almost like recognition flickered in his eyes before confusion returned. "My chest hurts," he managed. "That's partly from the CPR. I had to break your rhythm to restart it," she explained, checking his pulse again, stronger now, "and possibly from whatever caused you to go into arrest in the first place." Airport medical personnel arrived with a stretcher, and Sophia briefed them quickly on the situation. As they prepared to transport him, the man reached out, grasping Sophia's wrist with surprising strength. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. "Your name, I want to know who saved me." Sophia hesitated, then answered, "Dr. Rivera. Sophia Rivera." He nodded slightly, as though committing her name to memory, before the medical team whisked him away toward the airport's medical facility. Only then did Sophia become aware of the applause breaking out around her from the assembled crowd. She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "That was amazing," gushed a teenage girl who had recorded the whole thing on her phone. "You're like a real-life superhero." "Just doing my job," Sophia mumbled, gathering her scattered belongings. Her watch caught her eye. 17 minutes until her flight departed. If she ran, she might still make it. She arrived at Gate 47 breathless and disheveled, only to see the closed jetway and an empty counter. The flight had departed early. "Excuse me," she said to the gate agent who was already preparing for the next flight. "The flight to Boston?" "I'm sorry, ma'am, we closed boarding 10 minutes ago." 10 minutes. But it wasn't supposed to leave for another... Sophia checked her watch again and groaned. She'd lost track of time during the emergency. "We had a tailwind opportunity. The captain decided to push up departure to maintain schedule. There's another flight at 7 tomorrow morning." Sophia closed her eyes briefly, calculating. A 7 a.m. flight would get her to Boston by noon Eastern Time, hours after her shift started. "Fine. Put me on that one, please." One emergency phone call and several apologetic texts later, Sophia had secured a room at an airport hotel and a reluctant agreement from Dr. Westbrook to cover the first few hours of her shift. She dragged herself and her rebellious suitcase toward the ground transportation area, trying not to think about the repercussions this delay would have on her already precarious standing at the hospital. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she answered. "Dr. Rivera speaking." "Sophia, it's Martin." The hospital's chief of staff rarely called her directly. Something was wrong. "Dr. Gleason, I was just about to call you. My flight was—" "Never mind that," he cut her off. "I've been trying to reach you all day. There have been some changes while you were at the conference. Big changes." Sophia stepped out of the flow of traffic, pressing one finger against her ear to hear better. "What kind of changes?" "The board approved the restructuring plan. They've brought in a new administrator to oversee operations, a efficiency expert." Her stomach dropped. Boston Memorial had been struggling financially for years, caught between serving their community and staying afloat in an increasingly profit-driven healthcare system. Restructuring was corporate speak for cuts. When does this happen? He arrived today. Had his first meeting with department heads this afternoon. Sophia's missed flight suddenly seemed like a minor inconvenience compared to what awaited her back in Boston. And? Martin's hesitation told her everything. "Sophia, he's talking about standardizing care protocols, reducing unnecessary tests, streamlining staffing, the usual corporate buzzwords that mean doing more with less." "That's ridiculous. We're already stretched thin. Who is this guy? Some MBA who's never set foot in an actual emergency room?" "James Barrett. Apparently turned around 3 failing hospitals in the Midwest. Harvard Business School. Very impressive resume." "I'm sure," Sophia said dryly. "And I suppose he has all sorts of brilliant ideas about how doctors should practice medicine. He wants to meet with all attending physicians individually when he starts rounds next week. Just be diplomatic, Sophia. Please, we need this job." The "we" wasn't lost on Sophia. Martin was 3 years from retirement. Many of the staff physicians had families, mortgages, student loans. Boston Memorial served a community that needed them, patients who might fall through the cracks of larger, more profitable healthcare systems. "I'll behave," she promised without much conviction. "I have to go check into a hotel now. My flight isn't until tomorrow morning." After hanging up, Sophia stood staring at nothing, travelers flowing around her like a river around a stone. Another cost-cutting administrator, another battle between care and commerce. She'd seen it before at her previous hospital in Chicago, which was why she'd left for Boston Memorial in the first place. The hospital's mission to put patients first had aligned perfectly with her own values. Now it seemed those values had a price tag, and someone named James Barrett was coming to collect. By the time Sophia reached her hotel room, exhaustion had settled deep into her bones. She kicked off her shoes and fell across the bed without bothering to change. Just before sleep claimed her, a pair of startled blue eyes flashed in her memory. The man at the airport whose heart she'd restarted with her own hands. She wondered briefly if he'd recovered, if his near-death experience would change him. Little did she know how much that brief encounter would soon change her own life. James Barrett sat on the edge of the hospital bed in the Denver Airport's medical center, stubbornly ignoring the doctor's recommendation that he be transferred to a proper hospital for overnight observation. "I have commitments in Boston that cannot be postponed," he insisted, buttoning his shirt over the wireless cardiac monitor they'd convinced him to wear. "I've signed your AMA paperwork. My flight leaves in 2 hours." The doctor, not the one who had saved his life, but an older man with perpetually raised eyebrows, shook his head disapprovingly. "A cardiac event is serious, Mr. Barrett, especially one that required defibrillation." "I'm aware," James replied, remembering the sensation of electricity coursing through his body, of gasping back to consciousness to find a pair of intense dark eyes fixed on his face. "Dr. Rivera, I'll follow up with my cardiologist in Boston." "You don't have a cardiologist in Boston. You just moved there, according to your paperwork." James straightened his tie with precise movements. "Then I'll find one. Boston has several excellent hospitals, I'm told, including the one he was about to restructure. Boston Memorial had potential, good location, talented staff, dedicated leadership. But its balance sheets told a story of inefficiency and outdated management. James had been hired to fix that, to make difficult decisions that others couldn't or wouldn't make. It wasn't personal, it was business. Except now, his business had become intensely personal. His own heart, the literal one, not the metaphorical one his ex-wife claimed he lacked, had failed him in spectacular fashion, in public at the worst possible time. The irony wasn't lost on him. James Barrett, the man brought in to save failing healthcare organizations, couldn't even keep his own body functioning properly. His phone contained 17 missed calls and 32 emails. News of his collapse had apparently reached the Boston Memorial Board already. His carefully cultivated reputation for strength and decisiveness wouldn't benefit from this incident. As he gathered his belongings, James found a business card that had been placed with his personal effects. Dr. Kenneth Williams, Cardiology, Denver General. On the back, a handwritten note. "The doctor who performed CPR saved your life. Called herself Dr. Rivera, said she works at Boston Memorial, thought you should know." James stared at the card for a long moment before slipping it into his wallet. Dr. Rivera from Boston Memorial. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. His phone rang again. The board chairman. "James? Thank God. We heard you collapsed at the airport. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Richard. Minor incident. I'll be on the evening flight as planned." "Are you sure? We can postpone the department meetings." "Absolutely not." James's tone left no room for argument. "This restructuring has already been delayed too long. I'll see you tomorrow morning as scheduled." He ended the call before Richard could protest further. Showing weakness now would undermine everything he'd worked for. The board had hired him for his reputation as a fixer, someone who could make the hard calls, someone without sentimentality clouding his judgment. James had spent his career building that reputation, hospital by hospital. He wasn't about to let one cardiac event or one doe-eyed doctor with surprisingly strong hands derail his plans. As he walked through the terminal toward his new gate, James felt the weight of the cardiac monitor beneath his shirt, the slight soreness in his chest from the CPR. physical reminders of vulnerability he couldn't afford to acknowledge. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of saving Boston Memorial by implementing necessary changes. Cuts would be made, inefficiencies eliminated. Some staff would be reassigned, others let go, including perhaps a certain Dr. Rivera, regardless of the fact that he now owed her his life. Business, after all, was business. The following morning dawned with the particular hostility that only 4 a.m. wake-up calls can inspire. Sophia's alarm blared beside her ear, and she swatted at her phone with the coordination of someone still 90% asleep. "No," she groaned into her pillow. 5 more minutes. But the rational part of her brain, the part that had gotten her through medical school and residency on minimal sleep, kicked in. Missing another flight wasn't an option. She dragged herself upright, blinking at the unfamiliar hotel room that came into focus around her. The events of yesterday crashed back into her consciousness. The medical conference, the missed flight, the man whose heart had stopped beating beneath her hands, and the news about Boston Memorial's new administrator, James Barrett. Even his name sounded corporate and sterile. Sophia showered quickly, trying to wash away both travel grime and apprehension about what awaited her back in Boston. As an attending physician, she should be above hospital politics, focused solely on patient care. But in reality, administrative decisions directly impacted her ability to do her job effectively. Budget cuts meant fewer resources, shorter staffing, and ultimately compromised care. By 6:30, Sophia was at her gate, nursing a coffee that was more temperature than taste, and responding to emails she'd neglected during the conference. Her inbox overflowed with hospital correspondence, most related to the imminent arrival of the new administrator. Apparently, Mr. Barrett had scheduled individual meetings with all attending physicians over the next 2 weeks. Sophia's was set for Thursday, 3 days from now. Her phone buzzed with a text from Layla, one of the ER nurses and Sophia's closest friend at Boston Memorial. "Heard you're delayed. Barrett arrived yesterday, full corporate drone, designer suit, cufflinks, the works. Started asking for efficiency metrics before he even found the bathroom. Westbrook is freaking out," Sophia sighed. Just what they needed. Another suit who thought healthcare could be reduced to spreadsheets and profit margins. She boarded her flight, claimed her window seat, and immediately closed her eyes, determined to catch at least another hour of sleep before landing in Boston and facing whatever chaos awaited. But sleep proved elusive. Every time she drifted off, she saw those blue eyes again, confused, vulnerable, so at odds with what she imagined a corporate efficiency expert should look like. She'd saved countless patients during her career, but something about this particular rescue lingered in her mind. Perhaps it was the unexpectedness of it, or the way his fingers had gripped her wrist with surprising strength as he'd asked for her name. By the time her flight touched down at Logan Airport, Sophia had given up on sleep entirely and switched to reviewing patient charts on her tablet. She'd missed morning rounds, but her shift didn't officially start until 2 p.m. If she hurried, she might have time to swing by her apartment to change before heading to the hospital. The taxi line at the airport moved with glacial slowness. Sophia checked her watch repeatedly, calculating and recalculating how much time each delay was costing her. When she finally collapsed into the back seat of a cab, the driver greeted her with practiced cheerfulness. "Where to, miss?" "Boston Memorial Hospital, please." Her apartment would have to wait. Better to arrive early than risk being late on the day the new administrator was making his rounds. Traffic crawled along the expressway, and Sophia found herself mindlessly scrolling through social media to distract herself from the passing minutes. A headline from a local news site caught her attention. "Healthcare efficiency expert James Barrett takes helm at struggling Boston Memorial." The accompanying photo made her phone nearly slip from her fingers. Those eyes, that face, the man from the Denver airport, the one whose heart she'd restarted with her own hands, was none other than James Barrett himself. "No way," she whispered, zooming in on the image to be certain, but there was no mistake. The same strong jawline, the same striking blue eyes that had looked up at her in confusion after the shock from the AED. She had performed CPR on her new boss before she'd even met him. The universe, Sophia decided, had a twisted sense of humor. By the time she arrived at Boston Memorial, Sophia had cycled through shock, disbelief, and a strange sense of cosmic irony. She paid the cab driver and stood for a moment outside the hospital's main entrance, gathering herself. The familiar red-brick building had been her professional home for the past 2 years. Despite its outdated facilities and perpetual budget constraints, she loved this place. Boston Memorial served a diverse community, treating everyone from university professors to the homeless with equal care. It wasn't perfect, but it had heart, something she suspected James Barrett might lack, despite her efforts to keep his beating. "Sophia, thank God you're here." Layla rushed toward her from the entrance, still in her navy blue scrubs from the night shift. Her curly hair was piled haphazardly on top of her head, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Didn't your shift end at 7? Sophia asked, hugging her friend quickly. "Yes, but it's been chaos. Barrett's already made his rounds through half the departments. He's been asking for records, efficiency reports, cost per patient metrics, things we don't even track." They walked together through the sliding doors into the main lobby, where the usual bustle of patients, visitors, and staff seemed tinged with an undercurrent of anxiety. "He's really that bad?" Sophia asked, pressing the elevator button for the 5th floor, where the physician lounge was located. "Worse, ice cold, zero empathy. Looked at Mrs. Petrovich, you know, the old Russian lady with CHF who brings us piroshki, and asked why her length of stay was 3 days above the national average." Layla rolled her eyes dramatically. "Never mind that she lives alone and needed placement assistance." The elevator doors opened, revealing 2 physicians deep in worried conversation. They fell silent when they saw Sophia and Layla. "Rivera, doctor." Chen nodded. "Heard you missed the morning bloodbath." "Bloodbath?" "Barrett's department meeting. He's implementing a new protocol approval process. Any non-standard treatment plan needs signed authorization before implementation." Sophia felt her temper rising. "That's ridiculous. In emergency medicine, we often don't have time to fill out forms in triplicate before treating patients." "That's exactly what Westbrook said," the other doctor, Patel, added. "Barrett just smiled this shark smile and said, 'Then I suggest you work on improving your efficiency, doctor.'" The elevator reached the 5th floor, and they all exited, the conversation continuing in hushed tones as they walked toward the lounge. "Where is he now?" Sophia asked, wondering if she could avoid a confrontation until she'd at least had time to process the bizarre coincidence. "Boardroom budget meeting." Chen grimaced. "Rumor is he's cutting 15% across all departments." 15%? Sophia stopped walking. "We're already operating with minimal staffing. Any more cuts and patient care will suffer." "That's the point, isn't it?" Layla said bitterly. "Cut until we break, then sell the pieces to some healthcare conglomerate." Sophia wasn't sure if that was truly Barrett's goal, but she'd seen similar patterns before. Strip hospitals down to their bare bones, make them appear profitable on paper, then flip them to larger systems for a tidy profit. All while communities lost access to personalized care. In the physician lounge, Sophia changed into fresh scrubs and stowed her travel bag in her locker. A notice had been taped to the inside of her locker door. "Mandatory meeting with J. Barrett, Thursday, 10 a.m., administration suite." 3 days. 3 days to prepare her arguments against whatever draconian measures he planned to implement. 3 days to figure out how to face the man whose life she had saved without revealing their awkward connection. Unless, of course, he remembered her. But how could he not? People didn't typically forget the person who restarted their heart. Did professional ethics require her to acknowledge their prior meeting? Or would bringing attention to his medical emergency undermine his authority in a way that could jeopardize her position? Sophia closed her locker, suddenly exhausted despite the 2 cups of airport coffee coursing through her system. Questions without answers would have to wait. Right now, she had patience to see. The emergency department was its usual controlled chaos when Sophia arrived for her shift. Ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, promising more cases soon. 3 nurses moved efficiently between curtained areas, while Dr. Westbrook examined a child with a suspected broken arm. Rivera, finally. Westbrook didn't look up from his examination. Bed 3 needs discharge papers. Bed 5 is waiting on CT results. Bed 8 is a possible appendicitis. Surgical consult already called. Good to see you too, Sophia muttered under her breath, grabbing the nearest tablet to review the patient charts. For the next 4 hours, Sophia lost herself in the rhythm of emergency medicine. A construction worker with a nail through his hand, an elderly woman with pneumonia, a college student with a severe allergic reaction to shellfish. Each case required her complete focus, pushing thoughts of James Barrett temporarily from her mind. It was during a rare, quiet moment, as she documented her last case, that Sophia felt a presence behind her. A subtle shift in the air, a hint of expensive cologne. "Dr. Rivera, I presume?" The voice was smooth, controlled, professional in a way that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. She turned slowly, coming face to face with James Barrett. He looked remarkably recovered for someone who had been clinically dead less than 24 hours ago. His suit was impeccably tailored, his tie precisely knotted. Only the slightest shadows under those startling blue eyes hinted at recent trauma. "Mr. Barrett." Sophia kept her voice neutral, searching his face for any sign of recognition. "I wasn't aware you'd be visiting the ER today." Something flickered in his expression, a momentary hesitation that vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "I'm making rounds to all departments, getting a feel for operations." His gaze was direct, assessing. "Dr. Westbrook speaks highly of your clinical skills." That was surprising. Westbrook rarely offered praise, especially not to administrators. "Thank you. We do our best with the resources available." Sophia couldn't help the slight emphasis on resources. Barrett's mouth curved into what might generously be called a smile. "Resources that are, unfortunately, finite. Which brings me to why I wanted to meet you specifically, Dr. Rivera." Here it comes, Sophia thought, the speech about belt-tightening and efficiency. She braced herself. "Your department has the highest rate of diagnostic testing in the hospital. CT scans, blood work, specialist consults, all significantly above national averages for comparable facilities." Sophia felt heat rising to her cheeks. "We also have one of the lowest missed diagnosis rates in New England." "At what cost?" Barrett countered smoothly. "Is it necessary to order a full panel on every patient with abdominal pain? When that panel could rule out a life-threatening condition?" "Yes." Barrett's expression remained impassive. "And the 3 CT scans ordered last week for patients with headaches who were ultimately diagnosed with migraines." So he'd been studying their records closely. Sophia straightened her spine. One of those patients had sudden onset symptoms consistent with possible aneurysm. Another had focal neurological symptoms that resolved during examination. The third had the worst headache of their life. A classic red flag. "Would you prefer I had sent them home without ruling out life-threatening conditions?" For a moment, they stared at each other in silent challenge. Sophia couldn't help but wonder if he remembered her, if somewhere in his mind was the image of her performing chest compressions as he lay on the airport floor. Barrett broke the silence first. "I understand the desire to be thorough, Doctor, but healthcare has finite resources that must be allocated efficiently. Every unnecessary test ordered means resources unavailable for other patients." "I don't order unnecessary tests," Sophia replied, keeping her voice level despite her rising irritation. "I order appropriate tests based on clinical judgment and patient presentation. Clinical judgment that costs this hospital approximately 22% more per patient than the national average." The number was specific enough that Sophia knew he hadn't invented it. He'd clearly done his homework. Is there a reason you're addressing this with me now, rather than at our scheduled meeting on Thursday? She asked. Barrett glanced around the relatively quiet emergency department. I happened to be passing by, and I believe in addressing issues directly when I observe them. Before Sophia could respond, her pager buzzed urgently. Trauma case incoming. 5 minutes out. She checked the brief details on the screen. Motor vehicle accident. Multiple casualties. If you'll excuse me, Mr. Barrett, I have patients to attend to. She stepped past him, already mentally preparing for what awaited. Of course, his voice followed her. We'll continue this discussion Thursday. Sophia didn't look back as she rushed toward the ambulance bay, where staff were already preparing for the incoming trauma. But she could feel his eyes on her, calculating, assessing, measuring her value in dollars and cents rather than lives saved. The first ambulance screeched to a halt, and paramedics burst through the doors, wheeling a gurney. A young man, maybe 20, with a bloody face and an obviously deformed right leg. Sophia switched instantly into trauma mode, calling out orders as they transferred him to a trauma bay. For the next 2 hours, she worked feverishly alongside her team, treating 3 victims from the car accident. When the last patient had been stabilized and transferred to surgery, Sophia stepped into the break room, her scrubs spattered with blood despite the protective gown she'd worn. She sank into a chair, suddenly aware of how her muscles ached from the tension of the trauma cases and from her confrontation with Barrett. The man whose heart she'd restarted was now threatening the heart of her hospital. You okay? Layla appeared in the doorway, looking nearly as exhausted as Sophia felt. Fine. Just processing. Sophia ran a hand through her hair, which had mostly escaped its ponytail during the trauma response. I met Barrett. Layla's eyebrows shot up. And he's exactly the corporate drone you described. All budgets and benchmarks, no understanding of what we actually do here. Did he recognize you from somewhere? Layla asked, pouring coffee for both of them. He asked specifically which doctor you were when he came through earlier. Sophia froze with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. He asked about me specifically? Yeah, weird, right? Like he already knew who you were. Duh, so he did remember, or at least he suspected. Sophia's mind raced with implications. Did this make her position stronger or more precarious? Probably just reviewing personnel files, Sophia said, trying to sound casual. I'm sure he's memorized all our names and faces by now. Probably. Layla didn't sound convinced. Still weird, though. Sophia sipped her coffee, which tasted burnt and acidic, typical hospital brew. Through the break room window, she could see the ER returning to its normal rhythm after the trauma chaos. Nurses documenting care, physicians checking on patients, the essential machinery of emergency medicine functioning despite perpetual understaffing and budget constraints. This was what Barrett didn't understand, couldn't understand from spreadsheets and efficiency metrics. This was a living organism, people working together to save lives. Some things couldn't be quantified or optimized. Some things just needed to be protected. As her shift finally ended at midnight, Sophia gathered her belongings, her muscles protesting every movement. The confrontation with Barrett seemed distant now, overshadowed by the intensity of the trauma cases. But Thursday's meeting loomed in her mind like an approaching storm. She'd have to prepare, to gather data supporting her clinical decisions, to make Barrett understand that medicine wasn't merely a business, it was a calling, and Boston Memorial, for all its financial struggles, was worth saving. On her way out, Sophia passed the trauma bay where they'd saved a young mother earlier. The room had been cleaned, equipment restocked, ready for the next emergency. In this moment of quiet between crises, the hospital seemed to breathe, steadily, purposefully. Sophia touched the wall gently as she passed, a gesture of connection to this place that had become more than just her workplace. Whatever Barrett had planned, she wouldn't let Boston Memorial lose its heart without a fight, even if that meant confronting the man whose heart she'd literally held in her hands. James Barrett sat alone in his temporary office, reviewing the day's observations by the glow of a single desk lamp. The hospital had emptied of administrators hours ago, but sleep had become his enemy since yesterday's cardiac event. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the disorienting sensation of waking on that airport floor, looking up into the concerned face of Dr. Sofia Rivera. He'd known immediately who she was when he saw her in the emergency department. Those same intense dark eyes that had commanded him to stay still, the same determined set to her jaw. She'd saved his life without hesitation, and now she looked at him as though he might be the death of her hospital. The irony wasn't lost on him. James opened the file labeled Rivera S. and spread its contents across his desk. Her credentials were impressive. Top of her class at Johns Hopkins, residency at Mass General, fellowship in emergency medicine at Chicago Memorial, excellent peer reviews, superior patient satisfaction scores. The kind of doctor any hospital would want to retain. She was also, according to the utilization reports, one of the most expensive physicians on staff in terms of resources used per patient. His phone rang, breaking his concentration. The display showed Richard Blackwell, the board chairman. "Barrett," he answered crisply. "James, it's nearly 1 a.m. Are you still at the hospital?" "Just finishing some reviews." A sigh crackled through the connection. "The board is concerned about your health situation. Perhaps we should delay some of these changes until—" "The situation is under control," James interrupted. "I've already consulted with a cardiologist here. My condition doesn't affect my ability to do the job you hired me for." "And what condition is that exactly? The report we received was rather vague." James hesitated. The fewer people who knew about his cardiac arrest, the better. Perception was reality in his line of work. Weakness, real or perceived, could undermine his authority. "Minor arrhythmia, nothing to concern yourself with." The lie came easily. "Now, about tomorrow's budget meeting." "James," Richard's tone stopped him. "We brought you in because you have a reputation for making difficult decisions that others won't make. But if you're pushing yourself too hard—" "I appreciate the concern," James said firmly, "but I didn't collapse in an airport to be treated like an invalid now. This hospital needs immediate intervention if it's going to survive." The silence that followed told James he'd revealed more than intended. He pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling the beginnings of a headache. "You collapsed in an airport?" Richard finally asked. "The report said you experienced lightheadedness during your flight." "Damn. It was nothing. A momentary issue that's been resolved." "Who treated you? I want to speak with them directly." James's gaze fell on Sofia Rivera's personnel file, still open on his desk. "That won't be necessary. James, I have another call coming in. We'll discuss this tomorrow." He ended the call before Richard could protest further, then sat in the ensuing silence, staring at Dr. Rivera's professional headshot paper-clipped to her file. She'd recognized him today. He was certain of it. Yet she'd said nothing about their previous encounter, maintaining strict professionalism despite the bizarre circumstances. He respected that, even as he wondered what game she might be playing. Was she waiting for the right moment to reveal what she knew, planning to use it as leverage against his proposed cuts? Or was she simply being discreet about a patient's medical condition, as her ethics required? James closed the file and leaned back in his chair, suddenly aware of the fatigue weighing on him. The cardiac monitor beneath his shirt had remained mercifully silent all day, recording his heart's steady rhythm without incident. But his cardiologist's warnings echoed in his mind. Reduce stress, get adequate rest, follow up regularly. All things that seemed impossible given his current assignment. Boston Memorial needed radical intervention to survive. Half measures would only delay the inevitable collapse. The board had hired him precisely because he could make unpopular decisions without flinching, because he could separate emotion from necessity. And yet, as he gathered his belongings to finally leave for his hotel, James found himself lingering over Dr. Rivera's file one last time. The physician who had literally brought him back from death's threshold was now positioned as his professional adversary. How did one quantify that kind of debt? How did it factor into the cold equations of hospital administration? It didn't, James decided firmly, closing the file with finality. It couldn't. Personal feelings, gratitude, debt or otherwise, had no place in professional decisions. Even if those feelings involved owing someone your very existence. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of patience, paperwork, and preparation for Sophia. She worked a double shift on Tuesday to cover for a colleague with the flu, then spent Wednesday gathering data to defend her department's practices before her meeting with Barrett. By Thursday morning, Sophia was exhausted but determined. She'd compiled statistics showing the correlation between thorough testing and reduced readmission rates, evidence that her approach actually saved money in the long run. With her tablet loaded with this ammunition, she walked into Barrett's office at exactly 10 a.m. Dr. Rivera. He rose from behind his desk, extending his hand. "Thank you for being punctual." His grip was firm, professional, nothing that hinted at their shared history. If it weren't for the slight discoloration visible beneath his collar where the cardiac monitor adhesive had irritated his skin, Sophia might have believed she'd imagined the whole airport incident. "Please sit." Barrett gestured to the chair opposite his desk, the very picture of corporate efficiency in his charcoal suit. "I've been reviewing your department's metrics. I've prepared some additional context for those numbers," Sophia replied, opening her presentation on her tablet. "If you'll allow me." Barrett raised an eyebrow but nodded. For the next 20 minutes, Sophia presented her case methodically. Her testing protocols might be more extensive than national averages, but they resulted in fewer misdiagnoses, lower readmission rates, and ultimately better patient outcomes. The initial costs were offset by long-term savings. Throughout her presentation, Barrett listened with unnerving focus, occasionally making notes but offering no reaction. When she finished, he set down his pen with deliberate precision. "Impressive analysis, Dr. Rivera." His blue eyes met hers directly. "But it doesn't change the fundamental reality. This hospital is losing money every day. Without immediate intervention, Boston Memorial will close within 18 months. So we improve fundraising, apply for grants, find solutions that don't compromise patient care," Sophia countered. "All avenues we're exploring, but immediate changes are necessary for survival." Barrett leaned forward slightly. "I'm not the villain you think I am, Doctor. I'm trying to save this institution, not destroy it." Something in his tone made Sophia pause. For a moment, the corporate facade slipped, revealing what might have been genuine concern, or perhaps an excellent performance. "By cutting resources patients depend on," she challenged, "by making difficult choices now to prevent catastrophic ones later." Barrett stood and moved to the window overlooking the hospital grounds. "You saved a life recently with quick thinking and immediate action. Sometimes organizations need the same." The oblique reference to their airport encounter hung in the air between them, so he did remember, and he was acknowledging it, sort of. "When I save lives, Mr. Barrett, I don't sacrifice others in the process." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Don't you? Every resource allocated to one patient is unavailable for another. Every minute spent with one case means another waits. Medicine is constant triage. You know this better than most." The comparison caught her off guard. He wasn't entirely wrong, which made his argument all the more frustrating. "There's a difference between triage and systematic resource starvation," she finally said. "Is there?" Barrett returned to his desk, picking up a folder. "Your records show you ordered 3 cardiac enzyme panels last month for patients with vague chest pain who were ultimately diagnosed with anxiety or GERD. Because ruling out heart attack is critical, especially when you've seen what happens when cardiac events go untreated," he finished for her. "I understand better than you might think, Dr. Rivera." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken acknowledgement. This was personal for both of them now. Then you understand why cutting corners in emergency medicine isn't an option, Sophia pressed. Barrett studied her for a long moment. What if I told you I could guarantee your department's budget remains intact if you implement a new protocol review system, one that maintains clinical autonomy while adding financial accountability? Sophia narrowed her eyes. I'd say the devil is in the details. For the first time, Barrett's mouth curved into something resembling a genuine smile. Indeed, which is why I'd like you to help design it. Me? Sophia couldn't hide her surprise. You clearly care deeply about this hospital and your patients. You're respected by your colleagues, and you understand clinical necessity. Barrett slid a proposal across the desk. I need someone who will fight for proper care while acknowledging financial realities. Sophia stared at the document, suspicion warring with curiosity. Why me? There are more senior physicians. None who have demonstrated your commitment to saving what others might consider a lost cause. The reference was unmistakable. He was offering her a role in saving the hospital because she had saved him. I need to think about this, she said, taking the proposal but not opening it. Of course. Take 24 hours. Barrett's professional demeanor returned. But remember, Dr. Rivera, critical decisions like critical medical interventions can't wait indefinitely. As Sophia left his office, proposal in hand, her mind raced with conflicting emotions. Was this a genuine opportunity to protect patient care, or a clever way to co-opt her opposition? And why did Barrett's blue eyes, watching her leave, make her heart rate accelerate in a way that had nothing to do with professional concern? That evening, Sophia sat in her favorite cafe near her apartment, the proposal spread before her alongside a half-empty mug of tea. The document outlined a collaborative approach to resource management, physicians and administrators working together to develop guidelines that balanced clinical needs with financial constraints. It was not terrible. In fact, some of the ideas were actually promising. You look like you're solving world hunger over here. Sophia looked up to find Layla sliding into the chair opposite her, still in scrubs from her shift. Hospital budget crisis. Close enough. Sophia pushed the proposal toward her friend. Barrett wants me to join his resource optimization committee. Layla's eyes widened as she scanned the document. The wolf invites the sheep to dinner. Should I be worried? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Sophia tapped her fingers on the table. Is this a genuine opportunity to influence policy, or is he just neutralizing opposition? Could be both. Layla studied her friend carefully. There's something else, isn't there? You've been weird about Barrett since day one. Sophia hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about the airport incident, partly out of respect for Barrett's privacy, and partly because it seemed too bizarre to be true. But if she couldn't trust Layla, who could she trust? Remember when I missed my flight in Denver? She began. There was a medical emergency at the airport. A man in cardiac arrest. As Sophia recounted the story, Layla's expression transformed from curiosity to astonishment. You performed CPR on James Barrett, she whispered incredulously, and he's never acknowledged it? Not directly, but there have been references. Sophia described their cryptic conversation. I think that's why he wants me on this committee. He feels he owes me. Or he wants to keep his enemies closer, Layla suggested. Have you considered that he might be afraid you'll use this information against him? The thought hadn't occurred to Sophia. I would never do that. Medical ethics aside, using someone's health crisis as leverage is just wrong. Maybe, but not everyone thinks like you. Layla sipped Sophia's tea without asking. The question is, what are you going to do about this committee thing? Sophia stared at the proposal, weighing her options. If she joined, she might have real influence over changes that affected patient care. If she refused, decisions would be made without her input. And then there was Barrett himself, the enigmatic administrator whose life she'd saved, whose blue eyes seemed to see right through her professional defenses, and whose plans for Boston Memorial might either destroy or resurrect the hospital she loved. I'm going to accept, Sophia decided. Someone needs to fight for patience in that room. Might as well be me. Just be careful, Layla warned. Don't let those baby blues distract you from what he's really doing here. What are you talking about? Please? Layla rolled her eyes. I saw how you looked when you mentioned him. There's something there besides professional animosity. There is not, Sophia protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. He's arrogant, stubborn, and dangerously focused on the bottom line. Unattractive, in that uptight corporate way, Layla added with a grin. Plus, you've already had your hands on his chest. That was a medical procedure. Just remember, workplace romance is complicated enough without dating the guy who might shut down your hospital. Nobody is dating anybody, Sophia muttered, gathering the proposal papers. This is strictly professional. Giddy. But as she walked home later, her mind kept drifting to Barrett's unexpected offer, and to the brief moment when she'd glimpsed something beyond his corporate facade. Something human, vulnerable, and intriguing. The man whose heart had literally stopped in front of her was now asking for her help to restart the heart of Boston Memorial. The symmetry wasn't lost on her, even as she told herself that any attraction she felt was simply the result of their unusual connection. Tomorrow, she would accept his proposal. Professionally speaking, of course. James Barrett stood at his hotel room window, staring out at the Boston skyline as he absently rubbed his chest, where the cardiac monitor had been until yesterday's final clearance from his new cardiologist. His phone buzzed with an email notification. Dr. Sophia Rivera had accepted the committee position. An unexpected feeling of satisfaction washed over him, one that had nothing to do with strategic advantage and everything to do with the prospect of working more closely with the intriguing physician. Strictly professional, he reminded himself firmly. But even as he said it, James knew he was already in dangerous territory. The woman who had saved his life was now inextricably linked to his professional mission, and somehow, against all logic and experience, he found himself hoping that saving Boston Memorial wouldn't mean losing Sophia Rivera in the process. This is completely unacceptable. Dr. Westbrook slammed his hand on the conference table, his face flushed with anger. You can't possibly expect us to implement these restrictions. 2 weeks had passed since Sophia joined Barrett's optimization committee, and tensions were reaching a breaking point. Today's meeting was focused on new testing protocols designed to reduce unnecessary diagnostics, a proposal that had the entire medical staff in uproar. The guidelines are evidence-based, Barrett replied calmly from the head of the table, seemingly unfazed by the outburst. They're similar to those used at top hospitals nationwide. Those hospitals don't serve our patient population, Sophia interjected. Our community has higher rates of chronic conditions and comorbidities that complicate diagnosis. Barrett's eyes met hers briefly, a look she'd come to recognize over the past weeks. Part challenge, part something else she couldn't quite define. Which is why I asked for your input, Dr. Rivera. The draft guidelines aren't final. These exchanges had become their routine. Barrett would propose a cost-cutting measure, Sophia would push back with clinical concerns, and together they'd negotiate a compromise that somehow managed to satisfy neither of them completely while still moving forward. It was exhausting and, oddly, exhilarating. I've compiled data on our specific population demographics, Sophia said, pulling up charts on her tablet. If we adjust the testing algorithms to account for these factors, we might find a middle ground. Barrett nodded, his expression thoughtful. Send me your analysis. We'll reconvene tomorrow to discuss revisions. As the meeting disbanded, Sophia gathered her materials slowly, aware that Barrett was waiting for the others to leave. These post-meeting conversations had become another routine. Private moments where they spoke more candidly than they could in front of others. Your colleagues think I'm the enemy, Barrett observed once they were alone, his voice carrying a hint of weariness she rarely heard during official proceedings. You're asking them to change practices they believe save lives, Sophia replied, setting aside her professional filter temporarily. What did you expect? Rationality? Recognition that bankruptcy would end all patient care here? He loosened his tie slightly, a small gesture that seemed strangely intimate. You understand the stakes, even when you fight me on specifics. Because you've shown me the numbers, she acknowledged. They haven't seen what we have. The we hung between them, an indicator of their strange alliance that had developed despite their fundamental disagreements. Over coffee-fueled late nights reviewing budget projections and clinical outcomes, they'd formed a wary respect for each other's perspectives. "Have dinner with me tonight," Barrett said suddenly, "to discuss your testing algorithm proposals," he added quickly. "Neutral territory might help us find that middle ground you mentioned." Sophia hesitated. Their professional relationship was complicated enough without adding after-hours meetings to the mix. "Just dinner, Sophia." He rarely used her first name, and the sound of it in his precise, measured tone sent an unexpected warmth through her. "The future of your ER might depend on it." "Fine," she conceded, "but somewhere casual. I've had enough formality for one day." His smile, rare and genuinely amused, transformed his usually serious face. "I do own clothes other than suits, contrary to hospital rumor." "I'll believe it when I see it," she replied, surprised by her own teasing tone. They arranged to meet at a small Italian restaurant near the harbor, away from the hospital where they wouldn't be observed by curious colleagues. As Sophia left the conference room, she told herself this was purely professional, a strategic meeting to protect her department's interests. So why did it feel so distinctly like something else? The restaurant was intimate, without being romantic, small tables illuminated by warm lighting, the buzz of conversation providing privacy without isolation. Sophia arrived first, having changed from scrubs into jeans and a simple blouse that suddenly seemed too casual when Barrett walked in. True to his word, he'd abandoned his corporate uniform. The dark jeans and navy button-down made him look younger, more approachable, dangerously so. "Sorry I'm late," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Budget call with the board ran long." "Good news or bad?" Sophia asked, noting the tension around his eyes. "Complicated," he replied, a diplomatic answer that told her nothing. "But not tonight's problem. Tonight we solve your testing protocol dilemma." They ordered wine and food, and then, to Sophia's surprise, Barrett closed his portfolio without opening it. "Tell me something," he said, studying her with unexpected intensity. "Why emergency medicine?" The question caught her off guard. "That's not about testing protocols." "Humor me. Context matters in negotiation." Sophia considered deflecting but found herself answering honestly. "I like the immediacy, the clarity of purpose. In the ER, you don't have time to overthink. You just act to save what's in front of you. Like at a certain airport," he said quietly. The reference to Denver hung between them, the first direct acknowledgement of their shared history since her committee appointment. "Yes," she admitted. "Like that." Barrett's fingers traced the stem of his wine glass thoughtfully. "I never properly thanked you. It's my job. Not when you're rushing to catch a flight." His blue eyes held hers. "You missed your connection because of me. Would you have kept walking if our positions were reversed?" she challenged. "No." His answer came without hesitation. "But that doesn't diminish what you did." The arrival of their food provided a welcome interruption to the suddenly intense conversation. They ate in silence for a few moments before Barrett spoke again. "I'm not the heartless corporate villain you initially thought," he said, his tone lighter. "I actually became a healthcare administrator because I wanted to fix broken systems." "And I'm not the financially reckless physician you assumed," Sophia countered. "I understand resources are finite. I just believe patient care shouldn't be the first sacrifice." "On that we agree." Barrett's expression softened. "It's the execution where we differ." As dinner progressed, their conversation drifted from hospital politics to more personal territory. Barrett described growing up with a father who was a rural physician, watching him struggle to keep a small-town practice afloat. Sophia shared stories from her residency, the triumphs and heartbreaks that had shaped her approach to medicine. By the time they were sharing tiramisu, Sophia realized with a start that she was enjoying herself. Barrett, James, as he'd asked her to call him outside the hospital, was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny when he allowed himself to be. "So tell me about this testing algorithm you've designed," he finally said, bringing them back to their ostensible purpose. "The one that will miraculously satisfy both clinical needs and budget constraints." Sophia outlined her proposal, a modified approach that prioritized high-risk patients while creating clearer guidelines for routine cases. To her surprise, James listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that indicated genuine interest rather than looking for flaws to exploit. "This could work," he admitted when she finished, "with some refinement, of course." "Of course," she echoed with a smile. Outside the restaurant, the spring night was unexpectedly chilly. James insisted on walking Sophia to her car, their conversation continuing easily as they strolled along the harbor. "Thank you for dinner," she said when they reached her vehicle, "and for listening to my ideas." Thank you for not giving up on finding solutions," he replied, standing perhaps a bit closer than strictly professional. "Most of your colleagues have written me off entirely." "They don't know you saved a rural hospital in Minnesota from closing," she said. "I looked up your work history." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Research on the enemy?" "Research on a colleague," Sophia corrected. "I like to understand who I'm working with." The distinction seemed to please him. For a moment they stood in silence, the professional boundaries that usually defined their relationship feeling suddenly permeable. "I should go," Sophia said, though she made no move toward her car door. James nodded, but remained where he was. "Tomorrow's meeting, I think we should present your modified algorithm together, show a united front." "The committee will be shocked," she laughed, "the Ice King and the rebel doctor agreeing on something." "Is that what they call me? The Ice King?" His expression was amused rather than offended. "Among other things," she admitted, "most of which aren't appropriate to repeat." "And what do you call me?" His voice had dropped slightly, the question carrying weight beyond simple curiosity. Sophia met his gaze directly. "I'm still deciding." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Finally, James stepped back, breaking the tension. "Good night, Dr. Rivera." "Good night, Mr. Barrett." As Sophia drove home, she tried to make sense of the evening. What had started as a strategic professional dinner had evolved into something far more personal and potentially complicated. She'd saved James Barrett's life at the Denver airport. Now, as they worked together to save Boston Memorial, she couldn't ignore the growing connection between them, a connection that went beyond their shared mission and threatened the careful boundaries she'd established. The man who had arrived as her adversary was becoming something else entirely. And that, Sophia realized, might be more dangerous to her heart than any budget cut or policy change he could implement. James poured himself a scotch in his hotel room, replaying the evening in his mind. Dinner with Sophia had been intended as a professional strategy, a way to gain her support for necessary changes without the antagonistic environment of the hospital committee. It had become something else entirely. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Richard Blackwell again. "The board is concerned about the pace of implementation," Richard said without preamble when James answered. "We're not seeing the immediate savings projected in your initial proposal." "Because I'm building buy-in for sustainable changes rather than imposing arbitrary cuts," James replied, irritation seeping into his voice. "Dr. Rivera's modified testing protocols will achieve significant savings while maintaining quality care." "Dr. Rivera." Richard's tone grew pointed. "The same doctor who appears to be occupying a great deal of your attention lately. Indeed, she's a key stakeholder with valuable insights," James said carefully. "She's also the doctor who treated you in Denver, isn't she? The one you've been so mysterious about." James froze, his glass halfway to his lips. "How did you—" "Hospital grapevine," Richard sighed. Nothing stays secret in healthcare, James. The board is concerned about a potential conflict of interest. There is no conflict, James insisted, ignoring the memory of Sophia's smile across the dinner table, the way the restaurant's soft lighting had highlighted the warmth in her dark eyes. See that it stays that way, Richard said coldly. We brought you in to make difficult decisions, not to be swayed by personal connections. After ending the call, James stared at his reflection in the window. The board's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. Something had shifted between him and Sophia, something that complicated his mission at Boston Memorial. The question was whether that complication would ultimately help or hinder the hospital's salvation, and whether the growing feelings he couldn't deny would force him to choose between saving the hospital and keeping the trust of the woman who had saved his life. Incoming trauma, 5 minutes out. Sophia sprinted toward the ambulance bay, adrenaline washing away the fatigue of her 12-hour shift. The ER had been chaotic all day. A multi-car pileup on the highway, followed by a kitchen fire at a local restaurant, and now this. What do we have? She asked the charge nurse, who fell into step beside her. Construction worker, fell 3 stories, multiple fractures, possible internal bleeding, head trauma, BPs dropping in transit. They reached the bay just as ambulance sirens wailed into the hospital driveway. The trauma team assembled with practiced efficiency, nurses, techs, the on-call surgeon already scrubbing in. Under the new protocols Sophia and James had designed together, this qualified as an immediate full-team response, no administrative approval needed. The doors burst open and paramedics rushed in with their patient, a middle-aged man, bloodied and barely conscious. Sophia immediately took charge, calling out orders as they transferred him to the trauma bay. Get 2 large-bore IVs in. Type and cross for 4 units. I want a fast scan now and CT as soon as he's stable enough to transport. For the next 20 minutes, Sophia worked with focused intensity, assessing injuries and stabilizing the patient. When his pressure dropped dangerously, she performed an emergency thoracostomy, relieving pressure on his collapsed lung. It was the kind of decisive intervention that had once required approval under Barrett's initial protocols, the very thing Sophia had fought against. Now, with their revised system in place, she could act on clinical judgment when minutes mattered most. As the patient stabilized enough for transfer to surgery, Sophia became aware of a presence at the trauma bay door. James stood watching, his expression unreadable as blood-spattered staff moved around him like water around a stone. Their eyes met briefly before Sophia turned back to her patient, delivering final instructions as the surgical team arrived. Only when the trauma bay had cleared did she approach James, pulling off her gloves and protective gear. "Evaluating my resource utilization, Mr. Barrett?" she asked, the formality deliberate given their hospital audience. "Observing the results of our collaborative protocols," he replied, matching her professional tone. "That thoracostomy decision, immediate action without administrative delay. Exactly what our compromise was designed to protect." Indeed. A hint of something like pride crossed his features. The patient will likely survive because of it. The acknowledgement meant more than Sophia expected. 3 months ago, James Barrett had arrived as the budget-slashing villain in her professional story. Now, after countless late-night discussions, heated debates, and unexpected moments of connection, she saw a more complex reality, an administrator who genuinely wanted to save both the hospital's finances and its patients. "Committee meeting still on for 4, she asked, checking her watch. "Actually, that's why I came to find you." James lowered his voice. "The board has called an emergency session. They want to review our progress before making decisions about next quarter's funding." Sophia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ER's aggressive air conditioning. "They're still considering cuts, or more drastic measures." His expression was grim. "I've been asked to present our financial outlook. I'd like you to join me, present the clinical impact of our changes." "When?" 6 p.m. My office, first to prepare. There was a note of uncertainty in his question that Sophia had never heard before, as though he wasn't entirely confident in her answer. The past few weeks had been complicated between them. Since their dinner, they'd maintained professional collaboration during working hours, but the undercurrent of personal connection had grown impossible to ignore. Small moments, his hand brushing hers while reviewing documents, shared glances during contentious meetings, coffee left on her desk on particularly difficult mornings, had accumulated into something neither of them had acknowledged directly. "I'll be there," she promised. "Just let me clean up and check on a few patients first." His relief was visible. "Thank you, Sophia." As he walked away, Layla appeared beside her, eyebrows raised suggestively. "The Ice King himself coming down to the trenches must be important." "Board meeting tonight," Sophia explained, ignoring her friend's knowing look. "They're reviewing our progress." And that explains the way he looks at you. How exactly?" "He doesn't look at me any particular way," Sophia protested, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. Layla snorted. "Please. The whole hospital is talking about it. The unlikely alliance between Dr. Rivera and Mr. Bottom Line. Some people are even betting on when you'll finally—" "Don't even finish that sentence," Sophia warned. "We have a professional working relationship, that's all." "Sure." Layla's tone made it clear she didn't believe a word. "Just like you've been working in his office until midnight 3 times this week. Budget projections are complicated. So is dating your former nemesis. But that doesn't mean it's not happening." Sophia sighed, too tired to continue the charade. "It's undefined and probably a terrible idea. He's still the guy who might recommend downsizing half our staff. Or the guy who saved the Minnesota Rural Health Center from bankruptcy without a single layoff," Layla countered. "Yeah, I Googled him too. His reputation isn't as ruthless as we initially thought." "It's complicated," Sophia repeated. "Life usually is." Layla squeezed her shoulder sympathetically. "Just be careful with your heart, okay? Hospital politics and romance are a dangerous combination." Sophia nodded, watching as a new group of patients arrived in the waiting room. Whatever was happening between her and James would have to wait. Right now she had lives to save, and tonight perhaps a hospital to save as well. James paced his office, rehearsing his presentation to the board while waiting for Sophia. The data wasn't encouraging. Despite their innovative protocols that had reduced costs while maintaining quality care, Boston Memorial's financial situation remained precarious. The aging infrastructure required costly repairs, and declining reimbursement rates were squeezing revenue across all departments. Without additional funding or dramatic restructuring, the prognosis was grim. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Sophia entered, having changed from scrubs into a professional blouse and pants, her hair freed from its usual ponytail. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "The construction worker from earlier developed complications right before transfer." "Is he stable now?" "For the moment." She set her bag down and moved immediately to the financial projections displayed on his laptop. "These don't look promising." "No," James agreed, joining her at the desk. "We've made progress, but not enough to satisfy the board. They're considering more aggressive options." "Such as?" James hesitated. "Merger proposals from Northeastern Healthcare Systems." Sophia's head snapped up. "The corporate group that's been buying up community hospitals and turning them into outpatient centers. That's not a merger. It's an acquisition and dismantling." "It's one option they're considering," James admitted. "But not the only one, and not my recommendation." "What is your recommendation?" Her eyes searched his face, looking for reassurance he wasn't sure he could provide. "A more comprehensive restructuring. Some service line consolidation. Strategic partnerships with smaller providers." He met her gaze directly. "It would mean changes, Sophia, significant ones. But it would preserve the hospital's core mission. And keep the emergency department intact?" "Yes. That much he could promise." Their work together had proven the ER's essential role, both clinically and financially. Sophia seemed to study him for a long moment before nodding. "Then that's what we'll fight for tonight." D. They spent the next hour refining their presentation, moving seamlessly between his financial analysis and her clinical outcomes data. Their collaborative rhythm had become so natural that James sometimes forgot how adversarial their relationship had once been. As they prepared to leave for the board meeting, Sophia paused, touching his arm lightly. "Whatever happens in there, I want to thank you for listening, for working with us, instead of just imposing changes." "I should be thanking you," James replied. "Your insights have made these plans better than anything I could have developed alone." They stood close, too close for professional colleagues, not close enough for what they might be becoming. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. "James," Sophia began, her voice soft, "after this meeting, I think we should—" His phone rang, breaking the moment. Richard Blackwell's name flashed on the screen. "We need to take this," James said apologetically. "Richard? Yes, we're on our way now." By the time he ended the call, whatever Sophia had been about to say remained unspoken, the professional masks firmly back in place as they gathered their materials and headed for the boardroom. The board meeting was tense from the outset. Richard Blackwell introduced James and Sophia with minimal enthusiasm, and the other board members regarded them with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. James presented their financial data first, acknowledging the challenges while emphasizing the improvements their changes had already produced. When Sophia took over to explain the clinical impact, several board members actually seemed impressed by the innovative protocols they'd developed together. But the mood shifted when Richard opened the floor for questions. "These improvements, while commendable, don't address the fundamental structural issues," one board member said. "The Northeastern healthcare offer provides immediate financial stability." "At what cost?" Sophia countered. "They'll gut essential services and leave this community without comprehensive emergency care." "Dr. Rivera," Richard said coldly, "the board appreciates your clinical expertise, but financial decisions are our purview." "With respect," James interjected, "Dr. Rivera's perspective is essential to this conversation. The clinical and financial aspects cannot be separated if we want sustainable solutions." "Speaking of separation," another board member said pointedly, "there's concern about the objectivity of your recommendations, Mr. Barrett, given your personal relationship with Dr. Rivera." The room fell silent. Sophia went rigid beside him, her expression carefully neutral despite the flush creeping up her neck. "My professional assessment is based on data, not personal considerations," James replied evenly, refusing to dignify the insinuation with a direct response. "The numbers support our approach, numbers that conveniently align with preserving Dr. Rivera's department," Richard noted. "Numbers that show the emergency department is both essential to this community and financially viable with our modifications," James corrected, his tone sharpening. "If you're questioning my professional integrity, Richard, I suggest you do so directly rather than through implication." The tension in the room was palpable. Sophia's hand moved briefly to touch his arm, a silent show of support that didn't go unnoticed by the board members. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion without Dr. Rivera present," Richard suggested, "since the board needs to consider matters that may constitute a conflict of interest." Sophia stood before James could protest. "I'll wait outside. But I urge the board to remember that Boston Memorial serves real people with real medical needs, not just numbers on a spreadsheet." As she left, James felt a surge of both pride in her eloquence and frustration at the board's tactics. The door had barely closed behind her when Richard turned to him with open hostility. "Your judgment is compromised, James. The woman saved your life, and now you're advocating for her department at the expense of practical solutions." My judgment is informed by both financial reality and clinical necessity, James replied, struggling to maintain his professional composure. A balance this board would be wise to consider. The offer from Northeastern expires next week, Richard said. They're prepared to assume all debt and invest in modernization, while eliminating services this community depends on, James countered. I've seen their playbook in action. They'll keep the profitable service lines and shutter the rest. Sometimes difficult choices must be made for survival. The irony of Richard using James's own typical argument against him wasn't lost on anyone in the room. For 3 hours, James defended his alternative proposal, a restructuring that preserved essential services while creating partnerships with neighboring facilities for specialized care. By the time the meeting adjourned, no final decision had been made, but James could read the writing on the wall. The board was leaning toward Northeastern's offer, drawn by the promise of financial stability without the difficult work of true transformation. He found Sophia waiting in the empty cafeteria, nursing a cup of cold coffee and staring out the window at the darkening sky. "That bad?" she asked when she saw his expression. "They haven't decided yet," he said, dropping into the chair across from her. "But they're seriously considering the Northeastern offer." Sophia nodded, unsurprised. "And what about the other accusation? About us?" The question hung between them, the first direct acknowledgement of whatever had been building between them over these past months. "I told them my recommendations are based on data, not personal considerations." James held her gaze, which is true, but also incomplete. "Incomplete how?" Her voice was soft, careful. "Because I can't pretend you haven't changed how I see things, Sophia." The admission cost him something. Professional distance, perhaps, or the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his personal and professional lives. "Working with you has reminded me why I got into healthcare administration in the first place, to help facilities serve patients better, not just survive financially." Sophia's expression softened. "You're not the corporate villain I thought you were when you arrived, and you're not the financially reckless physician I assumed you were." He smiled faintly. "We've both had to revise our initial impressions." "So, where does that leave us?" she asked. "Professionally and otherwise?" James considered the question carefully. "Professionally, we continue fighting for our solution until the board makes its decision. As for otherwise," he reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers, "I think that's a conversation we should have when this crisis is resolved. One way or another." Sophia turned her hand to briefly grasp his. "Agreed. But James, whatever happens with the hospital, with the board, with us, thank you for trying to save this place the right way." As they sat in the quiet cafeteria, the hospital continuing its essential work around them, James realized something that both terrified and exhilarated him. Somewhere between that airport floor in Denver and this moment, Sofia Rivera had become as important to him as the mission that had brought him to Boston Memorial. And whatever the board decided next week, that fundamental truth wouldn't change. The following days passed in a blur of meetings, revised proposals, and little sleep for either James or Sophia. They worked side by side to refine their restructuring plan, gathering support from department heads and community leaders to present a united front to the board. Late Friday afternoon, as they finalized their presentation for Monday's decisive board meeting, Sophia's pager went off with an urgent code. "I have to go," she said, already moving toward the door. "Cardiac arrest in the ER." James nodded, continuing to work while she raced downstairs. An hour later, his phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Lost him. Massive MI. Too damaged to save." "No." The simple message carried weight beyond the clinical facts. Some things, despite best efforts and proper protocols, couldn't be rescued. It was a reality they both understood professionally and feared for Boston Memorial. James typed back, "I'm sorry. Some fights can't be won, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be fought." Her response came a moment later. "Exactly. See you tomorrow?" Final prep before Monday's showdown. My place, he suggested. No interruptions, I'll cook. The three dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again before her answer came through. Deal. Text me the address. And James? Thank you. He stared at those last two words, knowing they were for more than just the dinner invitation. Something fundamental had shifted between them, a recognition that whatever happened with the hospital, they had found something unexpected and valuable in each other. Whether that connection could survive the board's impending decision remained to be seen. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. James's apartment, a sparsely furnished rental he'd barely spent time in since arriving in Boston, became their war room. Takeout containers and coffee mugs accumulated as they refined their presentation, anticipated board objections, and built contingency plans for every scenario. By Sunday evening, they had done everything possible to prepare for Monday's decisive board meeting. Their proposal was sound, their data compelling, and their unified front unprecedented in Boston Memorial's recent history. I think we're as ready as we'll ever be, Sophia said, closing her laptop and stretching. Dark circles shadowed her eyes after 2 days of intensive work. Agreed. James gathered their empty plates from the coffee table. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging. Sophia nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, she walked to the window overlooking the city, Boston's lights twinkling in the darkness. Do you think we have a chance? James joined her at the window, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence without quite touching. Honestly, it's 50-50. The Northeastern offer is tempting to a board tired of financial struggles, but our alternative is viable if they have the courage to choose the harder path. And if they don't? She turned to face him, vulnerability evident in her expression. If they choose Northeastern? The question carried multiple layers, about the hospital, about the colleagues who might lose their jobs, about whatever was developing between them. Then we'll deal with that reality, James said carefully. But Sophia, whatever happens with Boston Memorial, some things won't change. Her eyes searched his, such as the fact that working with you has changed how I approach my job. How I see the balance between financial necessity and patient care. He paused, gathering courage for what came next. And how I feel about you. The admission hung between them, neither quite ready to define those feelings more precisely, but both acknowledging their existence. James, Sophia began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. When you collapsed at that airport, I had no idea how much that moment would change everything, for both of us. Some might call it fate, he said with a faint smile, though I prefer to think of it as fortunate timing. Either way, Sophia replied, her own smile matching his. I'm glad I was there, and I'm glad you're here now. They stood in comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding between them, needing no further words tonight. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and decisions. For now, this moment of connection was enough. I should go, Sophia finally said. Early start tomorrow. James walked her to the door, their professional composure temporarily set aside as he helped her with her coat. See you at 8. We can review one last time before the meeting. 8 it is. She hesitated in the doorway, then impulsively reached up to kiss his cheek. Whatever happens tomorrow, James, I'm glad we found a way to work together instead of against each other. He caught her hand before she could step away, holding it gently between both of his. So am I. As the door closed behind her, James touched his cheek where her lips had been, knowing that tomorrow's decision would affect far more than just Boston Memorial's future. Monday morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed at odds with the tension pervading Boston Memorial. James arrived early, reviewing their presentation one final time before meeting Sophia in the cafeteria. She was already there, looking professionally polished in a blazer over a simple dress, her usual ER scrubs abandoned for the occasion. 2 cups of coffee sat on the table before her. Figured you'd need this, she said, sliding one toward him as he sat down. Sleep much? Not really, he admitted, gratefully accepting the coffee. You? Barely. She gestured to the dark circles partially concealed beneath her makeup. Too much riding on today. They reviewed their strategy one last time. The easy rhythm of their collaboration now second nature after months of working together. What had begun as reluctant cooperation had evolved into something approaching a partnership, one that extended beyond professional boundaries in ways neither had anticipated. At 9:45, they gathered their materials and headed for the boardroom. The corridor outside was already filled with department heads and senior staff, their worried expressions reflecting the stakes of today's decision. "Quite the audience," James murmured as they approached the door. "Word spreads fast in hospitals," Sophia replied. "Everyone knows what's at stake." Richard Blackwell met them at the boardroom door, his expression unreadable. "James, Dr. Rivera, the board is ready." They entered to find all 15 board members already seated around the long table, their faces uniformly serious. Financial reports and the Northeastern healthcare offer sat in neat stacks before each member. "Before we begin," Richard said once they were seated, "I should inform you both that the board has already conducted a preliminary vote this morning." James felt Sophia stiffen beside him. This wasn't the protocol they'd expected. "A preliminary vote on what exactly?" James asked, keeping his voice level despite the sense of impending disaster. "On the fundamental direction for Boston Memorial," Richard replied. "Specifically, whether to pursue the Northeastern offer or continue with independent restructuring efforts." Sophia leaned forward. "And the result of this vote?" Richard hesitated, glancing around the table before answering. "The board has voted 7-8 against the Northeastern acquisition." The words took a moment to register. Against the acquisition. By the narrowest margin possible, the board had rejected the corporate takeover. "I see," James said carefully, not quite trusting this unexpected victory. "And what alternative is the board considering?" "That's why you're here," Richard said, his tone making it clear he hadn't supported the majority decision. "The board wishes to hear your final proposal for independent restructuring, with the understanding that it must provide a clear path to financial sustainability within 18 months. And James exchanged a quick glance with Sophia, seeing his own cautious optimism reflected in her eyes. They had prepared for this scenario, but hadn't dared hope it would actually materialize. "We're prepared to present that plan," James said, opening his laptop. "With Dr. Rivera's assistance, we've developed a comprehensive approach that balances fiscal responsibility with maintaining essential services." For the next hour, they presented their vision for Boston Memorial's future, a restructuring that preserved core services while creating strategic partnerships with neighboring facilities, modernizing revenue cycles, and implementing the evidence-based protocols they'd developed together. Throughout the presentation, the board's questions were pointed but not hostile. Several members who had previously been skeptical showed genuine interest in their innovative approaches. When they finished, Richard called for a 15-minute recess before deliberations would begin. James and Sophia stepped into the hallway, where the crowd of waiting staff had grown even larger. "That went better than expected," Sophia whispered as they found a quiet corner away from curious ears. "It did," James agreed. "But don't celebrate yet. The margin is too narrow for comfort. At least we have a fighting chance now." She smiled, the expression lighting her eyes in a way that momentarily distracted James from their professional concerns. "Whatever happens next, we gave it our best shot." "Indeed we did." He resisted the urge to take her hand, aware of the many observers watching their interaction. "And regardless of the outcome, I want you to know." The boardroom door opened before he could finish, Richard beckoning them back inside. The 15-minute break had somehow stretched to nearly 30, suggesting extensive discussion had occurred in their absence. The board members' expressions were impossible to read as James and Sophia retook their seats. Richard cleared his throat, assuming his role as spokesperson with evident discomfort. "The board has reached a decision." he announced. By a vote of 9-6, we have elected to reject the Northeastern Healthcare offer and proceed with the restructuring plan presented by Mr. Barrett and Dr. Rivera, with certain conditions. 9-6. 2 board members had changed their votes after the presentation. James felt a surge of professional satisfaction, tempered by wariness about the mentioned conditions. What conditions? He asked. Richard slid a document across the table. First, the restructuring must achieve specified financial benchmarks at 6, 12, and 18 months. Failure to meet these targets will trigger automatic reconsideration of acquisition offers. James reviewed the numbers quickly. They were ambitious, but achievable with proper execution. Second, Richard continued, the restructuring will be overseen by a special committee consisting of 3 board members and 2 hospital executives, specifically Mr. Barrett as CFO and Dr. Westbrook as Chief Medical Officer. James noted the deliberate omission of Sophia from this committee, despite her integral role in developing the plan. A glance at her face showed she'd noticed it too, though her expression remained professionally neutral. And third, Richard concluded, to ensure clear lines of authority and avoid potential conflicts of interest, Dr. Rivera will be reassigned from the emergency department to head the newly created Clinical Efficiency Division, reporting directly to Dr. Westbrook rather than Mr. Barrett. The purpose of this last condition was transparent. Separate James and Sophia professionally, preventing their personal relationship from influencing hospital decisions. It was both a recognition of what had developed between them and an attempt to contain it within acceptable boundaries. These conditions are non-negotiable, Richard added. The board requires your acceptance before proceeding. James looked at Sophia, a silent question in his eyes. The restructuring would save Boston Memorial, but at the cost of their daily collaboration. The new position would actually be a promotion for her, greater responsibility, likely better compensation, but would fundamentally change their working relationship. Sophia answered with a slight nod, her decision made. I accept the conditions, she said clearly. The Clinical Efficiency Division is a logical next step for implementing the protocols we've developed. As do I, James added, his eyes still on Sophia rather than Richard. The oversight committee structure is appropriate for a transformation of this magnitude. Richard seemed almost disappointed by their ready acceptance. Very well. The board will issue a formal announcement this afternoon. Implementation begins immediately. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached to congratulate them on their successful proposal. James accepted their handshakes mechanically, his mind already racing ahead to the massive work that awaited, and to the significant change in his professional relationship with Sophia. Outside, the waiting staff erupted in questions as soon as they emerged. Sophia stepped forward to address them, her natural leadership evident as she explained the board's decision in terms that balanced honesty with optimism. There will be changes, she concluded. Some will be difficult, but Boston Memorial will remain independent, serving this community as it has for generations. We'll need everyone's support to make this restructuring successful. As the crowd dispersed, some relieved, others still anxious, James watched Sophia with undisguised admiration. In the 4 months since his arrival, she had transformed from his most vocal opponent to his most valuable ally. And somewhere along that journey, she had become much more. So, she said, joining him after the last staff questions had been answered, Clinical Efficiency Division. Not exactly what I expected when I walked in today. Are you disappointed? He asked. About saving the hospital? Hardly. She smiled. About working less directly with you? Perhaps a little, though it does resolve certain professional complications. The implication hung between them, that with the direct reporting relationship removed, other aspects of their relationship might be free to develop. Perhaps we should discuss those implications, James suggested. Over dinner tonight? I'd like that. Her smile widened slightly. My place this time? I promise actual home-cooked food, not takeout. It's a date. The word choice was deliberate, acknowledging what they'd both been careful not to name until now. Yes, Sophia agreed, her eyes meeting his with newfound clarity. I believe it is. 6 months later, Sophia adjusted her blazer nervously before entering the boardroom. Today marked her first formal presentation to the board since assuming leadership of the Clinical Efficiency Division, a role that had proven both challenging and unexpectedly fulfilling. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of implementing changes, refining protocols, and navigating the complex politics of healthcare transformation. Boston Memorial remained far from financial security, but the initial benchmarks had been met, buying precious time for the deeper restructuring to take hold. James was already seated at the table when she arrived, engaged in conversation with Richard Blackwell. Their professional relationship had remained respectful, if somewhat distant, since the restructuring began. Richard clearly still harboring doubts about the path the board had chosen. James looked up as she entered, his smile warming in a way reserved just for her. Their professional separation had indeed resolved the conflicts of interest the board had feared, while allowing their personal relationship to develop without institutional complications. Dr. Rivera, Richard acknowledged as she took her seat, we're looking forward to your report on the first phase implementation. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I'm pleased to share that all clinical departments have successfully adopted the new protocols, with measurable improvements in both patient outcomes and resource utilization. As the meeting proceeded, Sophia presented the data her team had gathered, numbers that told a story of cautious but genuine progress. Emergency department wait times had decreased by 17%. Readmission rates had fallen. Patient satisfaction scores had actually improved, despite the resource constraints. Throughout her presentation, she caught James watching her with unmistakable pride. Their professional collaboration might have been officially restricted by the board's conditions, but their shared vision for Boston Memorial continued to align in ways that benefited the institution. When the meeting concluded, board members offered congratulations that seemed more genuine than obligatory. Even Richard acknowledged the promising results, though his caution about the challenges ahead remained evident. James waited until the room had cleared before approaching her. "Excellent presentation," he said, his professional tone belied by the warmth in his eyes. The board was impressed. "They should be," Sophia replied. "The staff has done remarkable work implementing these changes, especially considering the constraints." Speaking of constraints, James glanced at his watch. "Are we still on for dinner tonight? I have something important I'd like to discuss." "Intriguing." Sophia gathered her materials. "Should I be concerned?" "Not at all." His smile held a hint of mystery. "Just a proposal I've been considering." "Another restructuring plan?" she teased. "Of sorts." His eyes held hers momentarily, though this one is decidedly more personal. As they walked together toward the elevator, maintaining a professional distance that would dissolve the moment they left hospital grounds, Sophia reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them here. A chance encounter at an airport, a cardiac arrest that had connected their lives in ways neither could have anticipated, a professional battle that had evolved into alliance, friendship, and eventually something deeper. Boston Memorial still faced challenges, financial pressures, aging infrastructure, a healthcare landscape in constant flux. Their restructuring plan offered no guarantees, only a fighting chance for an institution they both had come to value. But some things now seemed certain. Whatever the future held for Boston Memorial, Sophia and James would face it together, their hearts beating in rhythm, just as they had since that fateful day at Gate 23. In the elevator, as the doors closed on the hospital corridor, James reached for her hand. "By the way," he said quietly, "I never properly thanked you." "For the presentation?" Sophia asked, though she suspected he meant something else entirely. "For saving my life," he replied simply, in more ways than one. Sophia squeezed his hand, understanding the multiple layers of his gratitude. "Funny," she said as the elevator descended, carrying them away from the professional world they navigated daily and toward the personal life they were building together. "I was just thinking the exact same thing.